Because all of this, by the way, Erik is leading someplace, so you don't know, Erik, what trail we're on. So basically what we've been talking about, Erik, is the royal family and the royal lineage of Thailand. And we're talking about the royal lineage in the sense of the family of the king and the dynasty that has set up, and also the lineage of the royal in this or the noble in the sense of the Buddha. That both of them are elite clubs. Now, the extended family of the royal family is huge, and that they are, in fact, the aristocracy, but they don't all have any royal support other than old land and things like that, because there's a lot of new industry in Thailand. But the whole government, including the army, its job is basically the job of the army all along has been both inside of and part of the royal family. Its job is to protect the royal family, and that also means to protect the royal assets. Once in Bangkok, I had let us say, a very, very good friend, I'll even call him a business partner, that allowed me to get into the inside of the Bank of Thailand. Now, the Bank of Thailand is not the kind of bank that everybody thinks. It's much more like Thailand's Federal Reserve.
Mm.
And they are sitting on a ton of gold, literally. In fact, 380 metric tons of gold. It's not the largest gold collection in the world. The United States has got 8,000, but 380 tons of gold, that's enough to need to be guarded.
Mm-hmm.
And around that, around the big building complex of the Bank of Thailand is a vault that's in the center that's well guarded. But then the neighborhood, the huge big neighborhood that you would find um, in any place in a kind of quasi-residential area, actually the whole entire neighborhood, dozens and dozens and dozens of city blocks are owned by the army. And in the garages of all of those houses are not cars but tanks. And there's also a naval military base that's on the river that's just very close. So this is the area that's well guarded. But the point that I'm making is that the generals and the army officers that rise to the top of the army are also members of the extended royal family. And that the army also controls the police, which means that the high people in the police are part of the army, which means also immigration. Immigration was part of the army before the army took on a full coup and threw out the parliamentary government, and that they threw them out because they were corrupt. And the corruption was basically from European. It was Thaksin Shinawatra. I don't want to get into too much history about all of this, but the Thai people have been just fine that there was a coup and then another coup to get the Shinawatras out. And yet, countries like in Europe, they think about a coup is a terrible thing, and the people are all being suppressed, whatnot, and that they look at how unstable the Thai government is because they've had dozens of coups in the past 100 years, and yet uh, there is no issue of stability here. But meanwhile, the point of all of this is going back to the son of King Mungut. I was able to pronounce his name yesterday when I saw it again, but it slips my mind. It's a Thai word that's at least 12 or 15 characters, and so forgive me for that. But he was under royal patronage and also a monk. but most of the royal family become monks and stay monks for a number of years. That the monkhood of Buddhism and the royal family are intricately tied together, especially the top part of the Sangha. And has also got all of the inner stuff. I mean, you're not going to be able to keep the noble teaching of the Buddha away from such a powerful family. And so this one that I'm talking about, who became the king, he was known in Thailand widespread to have been an arahat. And he looked it, and he acted it, and he did the job of an arahat with too much money to spend. And so he supported the Sangha. In fact, the way that he did it is he started a group called the Dhamma. And the Dhamma has many of the temples now around Bangkok, but that the whole point was is to revive and bring up to the standards of the nobility and also the standards of Buddhism that had fallen apart in some of the outlying areas. And so you wind up with the forest tradition, or basically you have the village watch, which is Mahanakai, and then you have the Dhamma. There's also a Dhammakai, but they're very unimportant and very recent. So let's not talk about them. But within the Mahanakai and the Dhamma, there is a close connection. So that when I was in Bangkok, even though they knew that I was from Wat Suan Mok, and which was a Mahanakai, I was still most welcomed. So that there is no distinction. And by the way, Tenisero, Achan Tenisero in California, is of the Dhamma. Okay, so the Dhamma got started as for part of the royal family, and much of the aristocracy within the Sangha now are on what you would call the religious board or the religious council or the religious affairs, and that they are the ones who manage all of the land from all of the temples. That's in fact one of the interesting side points is when a piece of land is dedicated as a wat, then the property is donated to the king, which then is put under this auspices of the royal council to remain there. So in Thailand, basically, once a wat, always a wat, even if there's nobody there anymore. It takes an enormous amount of work to get a piece of land away that once has been dedicated and given to the king. Which means that in Thailand, they don't have any of the lawsuits that are very common in the United States. Who owns the church property after the church has gone into bankruptcy? Or even if somebody's got their name on the mortgage and it's a thriving church, but they can make a lot of money by selling the property, then they'll sell it, and the people who belong to that church don't have any say-so unless they take it to court. I know, because that's one of the problems of Buddhism. And when I was in that, one of the lawyers says, hey, you guys of Buddhism, you've got a couple of 3 cases around the country. Christianity has literally hundreds of thousands of these kind of cases in courts all over the nation. So basically getting back to the point about this connection, then, was with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa through a monk named Buddhaghosajarn, who was the Samdet Sangharaj, but he was also a member of the extended royal family, and his teacher was this teacher that we're talking about who founded the Dhamma. And then I think it was like in 1918 or something like that, he chose to disrobe from the Sangha. He was the best known, most influential monk with all of these high names and whatnot like that, and he disrobed. Why would he do that? I can only think of one reason, and that is to become the king of Thailand. And so, but he didn't stay a king very long. He died soon after, and that's actually in the suttas. That arahats don't make it well outside the Sangha. So he lasted for several years as the king, but meanwhile, he still had many students. One of those students then was the Samdet Sangharaj, which means the prime minister of all of the monks, or the king of the monks. It's within the Sangha, but and he's got councils. I mean, this is enormous power, and that the temple that this guy went to was within a kilometer of the old palace. Mm-hmm. And so this is what we're talking about. Now, that's actually part of the reason why Bhikkhu Buddhadasa himself had connections with the royal family, because I thought that that he got connections with the royal family the way that he got connections from everywhere else. In other words, they heard about him, and so they liked what he had to say. Oh no, there's this other connection through the royal family, through the Sangha, down to Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, and so it was through the Sangha, not popularity, that got that connection. Several points. One is that when Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was just on the deathbed, just about to die, the king of Thailand offered to bring a helicopter down to Wat Suan Mok, pick him up, and take him back to the very best hospitals in Thailand, which, by the way, was Queen Sirikit, just across the river, by the way, from the royal palace. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, in his lion's heart, said no. And so there are two stories there. One is, look at that close connection, that the king of Thailand offers a helicopter, and this old monk says no. That in fact he was also known to tick off. There was two stories. One was actually the main general of the army, and the other one was one of the police captains. Now, when these kind of guys go on into a Wat, the whole Wat scurries around them. These are big, important people, you know. It was almost like Michael Jackson showing up at a black church in southern Alabama. Everything would change. But when these guys went to visit Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, he made them wait in line, as if they were ordinary people. That's the kind of lion's roar that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa had. That was the kind of power that he had, that he could make the general of the army and the head of the police wait. But he did kind of succumb to power in one way, and that is that he has become he was the Upajjhaya, which means the auspicious preceptor, who is the lineage dude who you ordain under. And you have two of them. You have the Upajjhaya and the Achan. And so the Achan is the one who is going to look after the young monk on a day-to-day basis, but the Upajjhaya is the one who determines where he goes, the big kind of stuff, whether he can go out of the temple on his own. These are the kind of points that he made. The only one that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was the Upajjhaya for was the son of the presiding then prime minister, who was part of the royal family. And so that was, again, that connection. Another connection was that there was a well that was installed at Wat Suan Mok. I was there at this particular time, and that before that they had been collecting rainwater. But the rainwater was just not sufficient for the number of people who were there at that time in the middle 1980s. So the king of Thailand then has a big well company with all of their heavy equipment come in and put in a really massive deep bore well we're only 6 kilometers from the ocean, so getting water was okay if you dig deep enough for it, down to sea level, but we were actually up on a hill. Guess what? The king of Thailand came for the dedication of that well. Now that's impressive, that the king of Thailand would come for the dedication of a well at a Wat. That's the kind of stuff that goes on in Thailand. Now, let's look at it from the other perspective, and that is that within the royal family, there have been nobles. There are those who know the Dhamma, and that this is actually quite well known in Thailand. And so this royal lineage, a lot of people, let us say from the West, they hear about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and they hear some of the trash talk from Bhikkhu Bodhi and others, and they think, oh, well, he's just a scruffy old monk living in a small wat in southern Thailand, and he just got famous because he had a loud mouth, but other than that, he's got nothing. Oh no, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was well schooled, well educated. He was part of the Pali system in Bangkok, and he actually took on this monk Bhikkhu Buddhaghosajarn as his teacher, and that teacher actually did come to Wat Suan Mok. Now, this teacher that we're talking about, Bhikkhu Buddhaghosajarn, was the Samdat Sangharaj of Thailand. He was the head monk, the number one, and part of the royal family. So this shows in that connection. But the point that I originally was going to make is that, so within society, you have a royal family. And within that royal family, you have a few that are actually noble in the sense of the Buddha as well as royal. But now, with Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, they are letting it all out for that nobility to be spread on a wide basis. And that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa started to doing that in the 1930s and got into trouble for it. And so the trouble actually was resolved by this Samdat Sangharaj, and that's how they became friends. So that by 1938, the Samdat Sangharaj was at Wat Suan Mok. But back in 1932 or 33, something like that, was when he was giving talks at a nursing school, and that talking about anatta, sunyata, all of the really ordinary kinds of noble things. And there were people in that crowd who didn't like it. And that's what caused the split up, or the Sangha Discessa. Now, the word Sangha Discessa means the breaking of the Sangha. Within the Patimokkha, you have several different layers. And one of them is the parajika, which means if you do any of this, then you're out. Like if you kill a human being, or if you take a large amount of money, or if you are claiming to have spiritual status that you don't really have. And so if anybody has doubt in their own mind, then they don't say anything. That in fact, the Buddha once said that if a layperson is a sotapan or higher, then he can say that he has joined the noble clan, but that within the Sangha, partly because of charlatanism, that monks want to get extra grub in their bowl, so they'll try to tout their own status. But one can hear if one is noble simply by listening to the way that he talks, if you know what you're listening for. In other words, you don't hear monks trash-mouthing others. You don't hear the nobles putting other groups down and that kind of stuff, that we kind of stay at a high noble level. So this whole point then is that the noble-minded ones kind of withdrawal from the ordinary world. And this withdrawal from that ordinary world is based upon wisdom that they can see through their noble training how the world is in fact a prison. And everyone is in prison. Everyone is in jail. Except that the jail is not a physical building that you're locked up in, but that we're locked up in a prison of the mind, and the shackles themselves is what we would call upadana, or clinging. And that clinging then is almost always, let us say, associated with the world in several ways. One of the ways that we cling to the world is through our material possessions, which we almost always we don't make by our own hand or being given a gift from an old monk who's about to die. Rather, we get our material possessions from out there, from the world. Even this laptop, it comes from the world. Okay, so the second kind of upadana, or the second mode of clinging that we need to look at, is, I'll go ahead and talk about it this way, and that is our views. Our views about society is based upon the territorial instinct, in the sense that this is our territory, and the people who are in this territory are part of us, and the people who are in that territory are not us. And because they're not us, they're probably dangerous. All right, so that is, in fact, the actual territorial instinct. You see that with the dogs. Boy, do they raise Cain when the internet provider came yesterday to fix the cable. I've been having trouble with the internet here, but it's because a limb fell on the cable, and I think that it partially disconnected the optic fiber. So they fixed it yesterday, but I had to hand pick and carry Lucky into the house because she was just not having these guys putting their ladders on the side of her house. This is the territorial instinct. And how do humans, well, we say, but humans can go anywhere, that we've lost our boundaries of territory, that we can go to Venice. All we need is the passport. Well, that passport basically is a formal way of talking about boundaries of who you are is where you come from. And that gets diverse in the sense of we identify then with various groups and organizations like Democrat or Republican, British, Indian, Thai. And this is actually the nationality or your political party or your religious faith or whatever like that kind of defines who we are. But by that definition, that's also a kind of prison. It locks you in. For instance, if you're a Sudra caste in India, that locks you out of also being in the Brahmin caste, unless you know how to sneak out of it. There are stories that I know of when I was there. In fact, the story was about one person that I was somewhat familiar with, as in the form of local gossip, that she was Sudra, but she was hired in the family of the Brahmins, and so she took care of the Brahmin lady. By taking care of her, they both spoke the same language. Let's see, what was it? It wasn't Hindi, but it was a language that was very similar to Hindi. So she learned the ways of her mistress, of her master. And then one night she stole one of her saris. Now, the saris of the Brahmins are shorter than the saris of the Sudra, but the sari is also fancier. not so plain. And so she stole a sari, hopped on a train, and went to Bombay and presented herself as Brahmin. Because she could act a part, she knew the language, she was dressed as a Brahmin, she behaved like a Brahmin, and so she can change caste like that. That doesn't happen often, but that's the way that it's done. So basically what happens then is that we get locked into the prison of the identity of who we are. Ever who you identify with, you're in their prison, which means that if there's a prison riot, you're part of that riot. If the food is good in that prison, then that's the prison food you eat. Now, this is how that works. If you claim to be a Democrat, then every piece of news is either going to be good news or bad news about the Democrats. If you identify with the Democrat, every time something good happens, you feel good. You're in that prison. And every time something bad that happens to the Democrats, you feel bad. You're in that prison. So the prison owns the way that you feel based upon what's happening with that organization that you identify with. So if you identify with and go to a church and that church burns down, you feel bad because it's my church. That's what we mean by identification. This is what we mean by the self. It's the self that attaches to or identifies with, and that attachment or identification then here is called Upadana. Upadana is actually the grasp, the clinging. It's the identification with. So that's what gives it my laptop and my political party. The attachment is the same, but both of them come out of slightly different instinctual behavior. That in fact, the materialism is even deeper level than this high identification with groups. In other words, my axe, if I don't have my axe, then I'm in grave danger at that point in time when I need an axe. With the Democratic Party, maybe I don't need the Democratic Party. It's not so dangerous if I don't have the Democratic Party. There's a whole lot of people taking care of the Democratic Party, and they don't need you. They don't need me. So now let's get down to the big one. And that is the nesting instinct. And the nesting instinct is that where we go along to get along. The nest is safe. The herd is safe. If you're a wildebeest out in the pasture all by yourself at night, you're eating your lunch. But if you're part of a clan, if you're part of a group, if you nest together, if you live in the same village even, then you've got safety in those numbers. But in that group, there is a hierarchy, and someone, maybe a grandfather or a grandmother or maybe the toughest bully on the block, but someone runs the place. In most houses in America, it's daddy. In most of the houses in Thailand, it's granny. Granny runs the show. But daddy will tell them, you do what I tell you to do, or you're out of here. If you don't abide by my laws, then you're out, right? That's the bottom line. That's why we have this attachment to. Now imagine that you have the entire society saying that to you. If you don't abide by the rules of the society, you're out of here, in the sense that we might put you to death, or we might put you deported, or they might put you in prison. But in any case, if you don't get along, then you're out. And the way that most people then try to get along is not through wisdom, but it's to go along with the rules of the house. This is where, when the house gets really big and also really sophisticated, that's where the century of the self comes into play. Have you, Erik with the C, have you seen The Century of the Self?
No.
Okay. Erik with a K has just seen Century of the Self, and he said it was horrific. He was horrified by what he saw in there. So let's talk a little bit about it. And I invite you and everyone to view this thing. It's a 4-hour-long video. It's on YouTube. And
Like a documentary?
It's a long documentary basically about industrial psychology.
Mm.
And that it starts with Freud. And Freud had a nephew, and the nephew was named Edward Bernays. And Edward Bernays put together what his uncle was finding out about psychology in order to manipulate people. Edward Bernays was very much wrapped up in Germany with their propaganda. He was the man who birthed propaganda. And you could also say that even though that he's dead now, but he lived into his 90s, he never figured out that what he was doing was criminal. Not criminal in the sense against the law, but it was criminal in the sense of against moral law. That let us say there's two kinds of psychology: therapeutic psychology and industrial psychology. Therapeutic psychology, the best they can do is kind of help people get out from under the industrial psychology they have now been buried in the past 100 years. So when the Buddha was talking about what was going on in the time of the Buddha, in the sense of rites, rules, and rituals, he had no clue about how sophisticated that system was going to get. But he called it Sila Bhatta Paramasa, and that is our attachments to rites, rules, and rituals. And the way that we can phrase that simply is go along to get along. Do what you're told to do. And if you don't do what you're told to do, you're going to get locked up, you're going to get killed. Good examples is Socrates, Jesus. They were killed. Why? Because they didn't go along to get along. Nobles don't go along to get along, but if they're careful, they can go along.
Or even worse, they'll go to hell.
Yes, that's part of the old story. That going to hell is actually that kind of story only works with children. And so if a child is told about hell, he'll believe it, but if he's told about hell as an adult, not likely. However, the more sophisticated stories about hell are easily bought by adults. Here's an example of that. If you do bad, you'll go to hell is the old way of looking at it. The new way of looking at it is that if you vote for Democrats, they have no borders. They'll let anybody in. And those brown people are going to come take your job. Have you heard that one before? Am I making that up?
Sadly not.
As a liberal in the South, I can say that I hear that one quite often. It's difficult to be a liberal in the South.
Actually, it's quite easy because now you can become a comedian within your own mind. Why? Because look at all the material that you've got to laugh at. And now you can see that old story of if you don't take Jesus as your Savior, then your sin is going to take you to hell, is now updated to politics. It's the same story, it's just a whole lot more sophisticated. And they've got all of this psychology that Freud and later psychologists with, Adler and Burns and Jung and Reich and Maslow and all of these others who were the students of Freud have over the century now put together a fairly complex understanding of the human psyche that we'll call psychology. They haven't really gotten down to why and how things work. They just understand that it does work this way. And then what has happened with government, big business, and religion, and certainly education, the grab that I call it, government, religion, education, and business. They have learned how to use industrial psychology to manipulate people into going along with what they want so that the people can get along.
Yeah.
And so your job as a liberal in the South is to go along, but not to get along. You kind of go along with them because inside you're laughing. But that's because you're not attached to their system of belief.
I've seen that with and it's very confusing where you draw the lines between your own personal philosophy and your ethnocentric philosophical group that you attach yourself to. Let's say I'm a liberal, where I
but yeah, I was about to do that. You just beat me to
it. Yeah. But when I talk to my stepdad, who's the most, conservative person, just, we got to tell him to put up all of his shotguns before our kids come in the house, that type of guy. But whenever I talk to him, talking to him, I just say it how I believe it. Talk about Trump. If he wants to bring up Trump, well, let's talk about it. But I feel like his bravado just shrinks in the face of the truth. It's like I can watch it wither away. He just sort of like, he'll start agreeing with me because he's just got nothing else to do, because it's all sort of ethnocentric facade. It's all how his societal group survives together, and his way of surviving is agreeing with all of his buddies at the paper mill.
Right. In other words, you can have him as a father-in-law, and over time he can begin to understand what you're saying, but he can't take that stuff to the paper mill.
Right.
He can't. And if you do, you're in trouble. Now, here's the point. Is that much of what we have to do to become noble in the mind is to rise above this world, to get out of that prison. That your father-in-law is in a prison, but the liberals are in their own prison. That possibly the best way for us to look at things is that I'm human and I can't claim much more than that. That having been all over the place and learned several different languages, and people ask me, why don't I go back to the United States? And the answer is because I'm not American anymore. I speak it with the language, but I still dare not open my mouth. Except here on the internet, which we can barely. So far, there's no one been pointing a gun at me through their camera. At best, they'll just destroy their camera. And by the way, that actually was something that happened on a regular basis. I first heard about it when I was about 10 years old. There was a television program called Gunsmoke. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Okay.
My grandpa still watches it.
They ran it for 17 years. It's still on. Every once a week for 30 minutes, they would have this cowboy at Dodge City. He was the marshal there. But in the opening show, they would have a shootout where James Arness, I think was the guy, would come out, and the bad guy was at the other end of the street, and they would have a duel, a shootout. Now, this happened on a regular basis. People would be watching this show and draw their guns with James Arness and occasionally just shoot their television. This was the mentality of the 1950s. Your father-in-law that still got shotguns, he's got a heritage. He's got a lineage. That lineage of the gunslinger mentality in America is very strong. But
his
now
dad was a drill sergeant. He traveled military family his whole life, so.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's an interesting history about the American military, to where it has not always been run by nobles, the way that the Thai military has had a history of being run by nobles. They, well, Ulysses S. Grant is a good example of how bad a general can actually get. McLaren was also a really bad example, but you don't hear about him. He was the general that Lincoln fired because he wouldn't go to war. He trained the army, and he kept training the army, and Lincoln kept saying, "Put the troops out, send them down there." And McLaren said, "They're not ready, they're not ready, they're not ready," and he finally got fired. So that's a good case of nobility, of let's not go to war. But within the military in America has gotten this gung-ho, this fear of the other. Now, that's a natural thing. It's part of our instinct. And that through industrial psychology and older techniques, the people of America have been brainwashed. Actually, I don't like the word brainwashed in this way, because if people, in fact, becoming noble is getting your brain washed.
Yeah.
You would say that they've been brain muddied up, I think, is the better way of looking at it instead of brainwashed. But you know how
Mind
the
control.
term is used. Right, mind control. But here's the point. Every human being from early age up through adulthood, because of these instincts, are always manipulable with lies. That we tend to believe lies because we tend to do what we were told to do without getting any benefit from what we were told to do. This is the essence of Sila Bhatta Paramasa, is that we go along to stay alive, but that we live our lives in a noble way because we know that the society is not designed to make you happy. It's designed to control you. It's designed to get you to vote a certain way, or to do a certain thing, or believe in a certain way. And it always uses this territorial issue of us against them. A political party will not survive if they don't have a them. You've got to have an opposition. You don't have a foundation of your own belief if you don't have an opposition. This is one of the problems why humanism is so slow growing, is because good humanism doesn't have an enemy.
It also uses it also uses our other, instinct of wanting stuff, and tying us up in
Materialism. Exactly.
materialism, and it uses that to, and it also uses that to say these people have stuff, these people don't, and so there's a class struggle too. It all kind of weaves together.
Exactly. And all of this then goes back under the label of Upadana, the four modes of clinging. That's what this whole talk has been about, is the four modes of clinging. The one that I haven't talked about yet is, in fact, the deepest one of all, the self-preservation instinct, because that's the source of territorialism. That's the basis for our nesting instinct, is the survival of the individual. And so if the territorial instinct can be polluted into racism, otherism, party against party, nation against nation, and the nesting instinct can be polluted into going along to getting along, fitting in with society, following the rules basically without getting any benefit out of them. And the third one, the materialism, which is done with self-protection, and that's also the procreation instinct. But procreation doesn't mean just having a new baby. It also means having a new axe, having a new car, having a new bicycle, having a new job. It's all of that material collection together, because we have the delusion that that's going to give us power, and then the power is going to solve the issue of security. Because basically deep down at the bottom of this is that self-preservation instinct that we feel insecure. And so those are the four modes of clinging: the clinging to self, the clinging to the survival of the person, when in fact there's no danger. You're not in danger of being survival. You just feel like that you're in danger.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you're talking to your father-in-law, but he feels in danger when he's talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have the materialism, which is also called sensual desire. But in this case, we're talking about the kinds of things that are tangible, the kinds of things that we can hold on to. The difference between great apes and humans is that the great apes, they use tools. There has been one great ape who had a sign language vocabulary of more than 600 words. Very, very intelligent in that regard. But one of the things that the apes don't do, even though they will use items as a tool, an example is taking a reed and putting it down into a hole to get the grub to start chewing on that reed, and then they pull it up. Naturally, the grub is so stupid, he's not going to let go of that reed. It's mine now, he says. And so out the hole comes the grub. The monkey eats the grub. What does he do with the reed? Does he put it in his pocket? No, he throws it away. That's what makes humans, is that we see that reed was valuable. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to hold on to this thing. And so the reed then becomes the rock that we beat marrow out of the bones that the lions left. Then we're going to take that rock and bang on it until it becomes a blade. Then we're going to put it on the end of a stick. We're going to carry that spear around, and fast forward into now that spear that we're carrying around is a cell phone. And that many people, in fact, will feel deathly afraid if they're without their cell phone. They got to keep checking on the emails. Maybe there's danger there. So you can see it's from the same instinct, the instinct of holding on to things. That's the Upadana. This is natural. It comes right out of our genes, literally, And the society that we live in has learned to manipulate that over the centuries. But since Freud, they've learned to manipulate it like that was on steroids. And so the clinging that the humans do in the 21st century is a much stronger clinging than the clinging that was happening in the time of the Buddha. So people could listen to the teaching of the Buddha and say, yeah, man, I got you. Let's just drop all of that crap and we're good to go.
I heard a monk talk one time, and he was giving what the Buddha said, that, you know, before stream entry, let's say, that the burden you carry is the weight of the Himalayan mountains, and then
it's the whole world. That's
and
just
then
the Himalayas.
yeah, and then afterwards it's a handful of stones, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
and then the Arhat is dropped one stone after another to where he.
Yeah, I feel like the level of distraction, though, that's available to us, it wasn't. I don't think the Buddha had any way to sort of know how bad society could become. You know?
But the teaching of the Buddha still works. It just takes a little longer because we've been really ground in.
Yeah.
Okay, that we've been ground down, and what we've been ground down by is illegitimate. Erik with a K knows the joke that's about to happen. There is a Latin phrase, and that is illegitimate, illegati, I don't know the exact Latin, carborundum. And the word carborundum here is like a grinding wheel. And the translation is, don't let the bastards grind you down. And in this case, the bastards are just illegitimate. And what we mean by illegitimate is worldly. Don't let the world grind you down. And so the first thing that happens is when we recognize that this whole world, especially the one that has been influenced by Edward Bernays and the industrial psychologist, that world has gotten us very much attached to it. That the shackles are really heavy, and we are in the prison of this society. And so the paycheck is part of those shackles. The cell phone, part of those shackles. Our car is part of those shackles. Living in a house that is too much that we don't need is a shackle. We think that we need the big house, when in fact we don't. That my family could get along just fine with half the house that we've got. That doesn't mean that I want to double the number of people here. We've already got 6. So the point then is that we can really understand this upadana, this clinging, happens at an instant. It just pops right up. What does it pop up from? It pops up from feelings. The way we feel gives rise to the attachments or to the clinging or the upadana that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa talks about as a prison. He's actually got a book called The Prison of Life. And you could actually go so far as to say that The Prison of Life that's written by Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and this documentary of the Century of the Self is actually teaching the same lesson. Except that many people who will look at that Century of the Self, they'll say, my God, how awful. But they don't actually see a way out of it. And so our idea then is that we're not going to be able to see our way out of it in a big way, but we can see our way out of it in a very small way every time we catch ourselves in those kinds of attachments, in that upadana. In other words, are we going to go to jail right now? Or are we going to stay out of jail and be free? in a way that Buddha Dhamma is a get out of jail free card.
It seems like I see the cycle of insight now like play out on a grand scale through history and through sort of, I've been thinking a lot about postmodern history and what you're saying, like the century of the self, and how, because I make video and that's what I do for a living, and I was really into photography, and photography is all about capturing a moment, having a moment. I want that moment and I want to have it. And then I would walk around and I wouldn't be able to even enjoy a beautiful moment because I'd be like, I want to have that. Where's my camera, right? But I feel like that on a postmodern scale, it's like the invention of the camera, the invention of this media. We get so attached to, we mythologize our world in this way that's completely over the top, and we learn we have an insight, right? And then we immediately rest on our laurels as hard as we can, and just and just sort of get as bad as we can until we can see where we're still have problems, which will always still have problems. We have an insight, but there's still problems there, and they become more and more and more apparent, and then we got to work on that. You know, and
well,
yeah.
Here's one way, though, to look at it. And this is actually a very good way to look at it. Most people, when they hear the word vipassana and understand it to be insight meditation, and in fact, even sometimes the way that it's taught is that you practice a long time and then you get an insight, and that insight then may or may not have some effect later. It's like getting the piece of a puzzle, that insight. And then you get another piece of the puzzle, and then you put that back with the other, and now some actual change can become possible. But I would like to give you a completely different definition of the word insight. And that is, every time that you look, and look closely and look deeply, that's insight. That's what the word insight means. It means sight into, and that's what the word vipassana means. And so basically every time that sati happens, vipassana happens. That's how many insights, because there's that many pieces to the puzzle. And so the more looking that you do, the more that you can remember to look, and the more looking you do, then the easier it will be in that moment over and over again as we're practicing and building the skill, so that this next moment when insight occurs, when the wake-up call, when the sati appears, then that means it is easier now to come out of the hindrances, to gladden the mind, to take a deep breath, to change our attitude into the attitude of a winner, and to become satisfied in that moment. That's insight. Because what? Because before that moment of insight, we were probably in the hindrance, which is another way of saying we were in Upadana, clinging to something, clinging to a political party, clinging to an idea, clinging to a lawnmower that won't start. Just there's all kinds of things to cling to.
An addiction.
Right, to the point of addicting, because we're clinging more and more tightly. More and more tightly. That's the Upadana. And so in that regard, it's not that we are carrying around a ball, how to say it. You know, the idea of a ball and chain from the really old days. And that sometimes it would be necessary for people to get anywhere that they'd actually have to pick up and physically carry the ball with them rather than dragging it around. Well, guess what? The chain is not there. We're just carrying this huge ball imagining that we're chained to it, but we can put that ball down anytime we want to. And anytime that you recognize that you've got that big cannonball or big heavy ball that you're carrying, or that fistful of rocks, or that Himalayas, sometimes we feel like we're carrying the whole world on our shoulders. But if we wake up in that instant, we can say, I can take a deep breath and set that turkey down. And we keep practicing doing that over and over and over again. That's what's so brilliant about the teachings of the Buddha is that, yes, it's easy to learn what to do, but it's hard to remember to do it, and it takes time to master it. But you can do that. You can become noble. You can become light. The first kind of light is the light of the waking up that I'm carrying this huge ball. I'm carrying the world on my shoulders. I'm carrying around the Himalayas. I'm carrying around a ball and chain, and the chain is not there. I'm just carrying the ball around. And so the second kind of, and so that's enlightenment. I'm waking up. I'm carrying a ball that I don't need to carry. And then we set the ball down. And now that's real freedom, the deliverance. And so we can see enlightenment as a two-stage process. One is the waking up to that ball and chain. And then the second one is putting the ball down. That's deliverance, knowledge and deliverance. The Buddha talks about that in a number of different suttas. So knowledge comes first. The waking up comes first. And so part of the job that I've given myself to do, a very happy job, is to talk about this aspect of what kind of ball are you carrying around. Because in fact, you're carrying around at least four. You're carrying around the entire territory of the world. You're carrying around all the rights, rules, and rituals of the entire society. You're carrying around a huge amount of material goods. You think you own that car. No, the car owns you. And sometimes the car will even demand things of you, like take me to the shop. And you don't have any choice about it, and only you. I'm not going to tell anybody else because I own you. I've got dogs like that are here. They're not my dogs. I'm their human.
Mm-hmm.
They own me. And so we become owned by our stuff or imprisoned by it until we recognize. Pardon?
I just can't help but think about my mom. She's so obsessed with her house. You know, we grew up poor, and when I left, she married and they have money, and she's always been obsessed with decorating, and she's just keeps adding on to her house, and she's, adding rooms, and she's always buying new stuff, and she doesn't even like to travel because she doesn't want to be away from her house. She's just, it is like literally like a prison.
Precisely. You probably heard of the musical Fiddler on the Roof.
Mm-hmm.
In that, there's a song. If I were a rich man, da 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 da. Okay. Now that's that kind of thought. Not necessarily those words to that song, but she had those thoughts when she was poor. If I were a rich man, I would. Okay, so now she's trying to fulfill the dream that she had years ago instead of living in the present moment. If she would walk into that house and say, my God, what have I been doing? Look at this huge ball and chain I've been carrying around because I told myself something 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Her mother, of course, played a big role in that. But in her psychology, it's easy to see, but she's got a doll house, and it's very, very much like a dollhouse. And she also expects everyone to just be, she gets upset because she doesn't get there's not enough reward. There's not enough praise. It's not fulfilling. There's never enough praise. It's all
exactly
empty. It's completely, totally empty. And and the praise, even if she gets it, the praise is empty. It can't be anything but empty. It's totally empty. You know?
All right. Well, let's magnify that times 1,000 or 10,000. Have you ever heard of the name Judy Garland?
Oh yeah.
She was the star of The Wizard of Oz when she was young. She played a lot of stuff with Mickey Rooney. She was a star. And what happened when she was then fully grown and a singer? By the way, she was Liza Minnelli's mother.
Mm-hmm.
Judy Garland eventually killed herself. But before she did, years before she did, even though she stopped having gigs, she would go out on the stage, everybody would clap, and she would smile and everything. And then when the performance is over, then she would go back to the stage, into her room, and with her confidants, she would say, "Did they love me? Did they really love me?" All right. So now your mom is, do they love my house? Do they love me? Look, Mom, I've done the house that you wanted me to do. Why don't people love me for it?
Yeah, we're sitting here with $100,000 in student debt, and she wants us. She's spending all of her money on her house, and she's like, "Why don't you love my stuff?" You know, and it's like,
"Why don't you love my debt?"
Yeah, let's talk about that. Or my dad, who goes on. He's spent hundreds of $1,000s on hunting trips, going to Russia and killing bears, and there's animals all over the place, and it's just all this stuff, and they're just building this mountain of shit that they expect everybody to love when they walk in. And
well, I was raised like that in South Carolina. Yeah. That one of the things that my dad did to go along to get along was that there were when we would move from town to town, people would be part of the hunting thing, and so he would send me off with the neighbors to go hunting. So I could have easily fallen into that hunting trip to Russia kind of thing, because that was the culture that I was raised in. But what happened was that when I was out on the hunt, I became more interested and curious about the dogs than about the guns. And so I've got a house full of dogs instead of a house full of guns.
Yeah,
but it's the same thing. This is what we were raised with. This is the way. Now, we can go so far as to make the statement that this hunting culture that is Christian, that is racist, that is part of the Republican Party, those people are doing exactly what I was doing and what you were doing, and that is doing what you were told to do. Just like the Republican politicians who came from those areas are all doing what we were told to do. And so it's actually kind of the luck of the draw as who's telling you what to do when you're young is going to determine what kind of life you're going to have. This is destiny. Until we decide that we're not going to live according to the way that we're destined to live. That doing what I was told to do and not liking it is not providential. This leads to that word about free will. You know, the Christians talk about free will and not free will, but really the showstopper is, well, I've got free will because God made me have free will. I didn't have a choice about whether I had a choice or not. And a lot of people, in fact, they don't want to have free will. They want to be robbed of their free will. They want to go along to get along and live a mediocre life doing what they were told to do because everybody around me is doing it. And so they give up the possibility of their will. But those who take their free will find out, in fact, that that free will is not free. It's actually expensive. And it's going to be expensive in all four of those modes of clinging, because the expense is that we begin to give up our material goods. We begin to give up our jollies about getting a job and getting a big paycheck. We give up our territorial instincts, and we begin to lose our boundaries. In that regard, Buddhism is a very negative religion, if it's a religion. It's a very negative teaching. But all you've got to do, or all you've got to lose, in fact, is the suffering or the dissatisfaction that we have from going along to get along.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this is the way that we start to understand things. Now, by the way, what we've been harping on today, this Silabbata Paramasa, is actually a fetter. It's the second of the three fetters that are, let us say, eradicated through knowledge. The real deliverance, then, of the actual putting the ball down, takes work. Unhinging ourselves from the ball that we can see now takes work. And so the free will is not free, it's expensive. We have to unhinge ourselves from our identities about whatever that you identify with. Whatever it is, when it suffers, you suffer. The only way out of that suffering is to stop identifying with it.
So we talked about this before, the Silabbata Paramasa, basically, I think you said the first stage is recognizing it and having the feeling of disgust.
Yes,
right?
well, that's not necessarily the first thing that happens. That disgust will build up.
Yeah, I've felt a lot of that recently, and I'm just curious how you get past that.
Well, there's actually two kinds of disgust. One is the disgust of how the world actually works. The society we live in is actually disgusting.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
However, there's another kind of disgust, and that is I'm still in that world, and that's even more disgusting. That I'm still stuck in it, that I can't get out of it until I begin to practice it. And then the only time that I can get out of it is when I remember to get out of it, and all the rest of the day I'm stuck in it. And that's disgusting also. So we become disgusted with our lack of sati. We become disgusted with not practicing. We become disgusted with being disgusted by the world.
Right, yeah.
All right, so as we begin to practice through that disgust, we come to the place that is on that wall drawing at Wat Suan Mok, done by Emanuel Sherman, that's got the Mahayana Buddha, the fat one, with his arms in the air, and right above his right hand is the word free is now, and the F is actually a gecko, and geckos have their own symbology. But then down the side with that big joy, and his hands are in the air, and he's got this big smile on his face that says, "Oh, boundless joy to find at last there is no there is no happiness in this world." That's when we can be free from the Silabbata Paramasa, is when we begin to laugh at it. Like I was telling you, when you're talking to your father-in-law, you can actually laugh at all of the comedian material that he's giving you. But you have to get over being disgusted by it first.
Yeah.
Now, comedy knows all about this. that comedians, if a disaster happens, they have to wait a certain period of time before they can tell a joke about it. They can't tell a joke about a big disaster the first year or two after it happens, but after that, now it's free material for the comedians. So we have to get over our disgust for the world, but we do that one breath at a time, one noble thought at a time, one moment of sati at a time. We wake up and we say, oh, what disgusting that is.
Yeah, I feel like it's being attached. It's all back to attachment, being attached and identifying with the world, and your happiness is attached to the state of the world, then, which is not something you can control. Yeah, and
so basically it would be like this. Imagine that the arm is now the world. And this is Upadana. Okay, and this is what is disgusting, is that I am clinging tightly to something that's disgusting. And seeing that I'm tightly clinging to something that's disgusting is also disgusting. It's disgusting to see that I have gotten so attached to this disgusting thing. And so we begin to pry the fingers off one at a time, beginning to let go, and then we'll come back and grab it again, and then we let it go, and then we'll come back again. This happens over and over again until finally, or pretty soon, in fact, we begin to see not the actual grasping and clinging that has to be let go, but the actual approach. I want it. Wait a minute, stop there. That's disgusting. Why are you about to grab it again?
Yeah, and there's levels of it, like being attached. Let's say that I'm attached to my son, or if I were attached to my stepdad, like if I thought that the way he acted reflected on me, and that if he acts this way, then I need to change him because it reflects on me. Well, I can get over that because my stepdad lives in South Arkansas and it doesn't really matter. But then there's attachment to people should just be a certain way, right?
Yeah.
Thinking people should be a certain way and he should be this way. And I can't even like him if he's this way. I can be happy with anybody. I don't care. He can say all of the racist stuff he wants to. I don't agree with it, but I still will. I understand him and his situation. And I'm not attached to it. I'm not attached to him and his mentality because it's childish in a lot of ways.
Okay. Now, here's another way of looking at it, and that is that you can detach yourself from his racism, but there is still that disgust with his racism. There will come a time when, with knowledge and wisdom and vision, you can have a conversation with him in racism, and you can out-racist him. You can take what his racism is to an absolute further. In other words, we're taking it out of the racism that's dirty into a joke.
Well, the way I see racism, and I talked to somebody about this, is that it was completely necessary for human evolution. I mean, people were racist, and they grouped together. They were able to group together. People group together against something else, and then they have an ethnocentric belief about another group, and that allowed a bunch of white people to unconditionally sort of love each other, right? And so they were able to group together and become more powerful. And so you can see how it played a part.
Okay.
You know.
Let me ask you in this way. Question it this way: has there ever been a war or a battle or a conflict that was started defensively? Or are not all wars, all conflicts, and all battles started by a preemptive strike? In other words, if we don't strike them first, they'll strike us.
Right, yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so in that regard, a good defense is a good offense. So let's go hurt them before they hurt us.
Yeah.
And everybody's running around in a state of fear. And if we didn't have that fear for each other, we didn't have that territorial instinct that way, then humanity may be, in fact, many, many centuries ahead of where we are. Look at almost every civilization has been destroyed. They get weak from within, but they could still stand. That the Roman Empire would have still been around today. It might have become quite magnificent if we hadn't lost all the technology of those times, but we did, because of the Vandals, the Visigoths, the Muns, all of these invaders.
Mm-hmm.
Well, those people had to go do something. An example of that is that there were droughts on the plains of Asia. And so the Romans, they get on this side of the river and say, we're going to kill you if you come on this side of the river. But if those people had come and the Romans says, oh, I see that you've had a famine, come on over, we'll feed you, we'll put you to work, here, help us build this, this Parthenon or another Colosseum or something. But oh no, they go into warfare instead because of fear. So that example that you're talking about is true. That's how society got started. But I would claim that would have been a destroyer of society and has caused us to progress very slowly.
Well, like everything else, there's a reason that there are Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens wiping out all other. I'm not saying that that's good. It's just what happened.
I know.
Homo sapiens.
Well, that's all because all of the sapiens are in the South and all the homos are in San Francisco. And the reason for it is because they can't stand each other. They hate each other, and that hatred and not standing each other is because of fear.
Right. And it's cycles of having less fear, being more open, being more inclusive, and that, and now racism it's so unsuccessful. It's killing itself off. I mean, it's detrimental to itself, and people hate racists for the most part. I mean, nobody can stand for a white nationalist or anything like that. That's probably one of the most, even in the South, you would never say that. It's a very, very small subset of people who believe that way, and
but they believe strongly, and because they believe strongly, they behave strongly, and because there's other people who can see the advantage in using people who feel strongly about things, that they can be manipulated because they feel strongly about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's what got Christianity wrapped up in politics. I was watching that kind of from the outside, but when I was a child in the 1950s, the Southern Baptist Church had nothing to do with government, nothing to do with any of that kind of stuff. That our job was, you become a good little Christian boy, Jesus loves you.
Mm-hmm.
But
now
it
my
changed.
Grandma's a Trump supporter.
Now they're all Trump supporters, exactly.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because they were politicized. Why or how did they become politicized? It happened with Nixon. That was it was actually the underlying racism that was against the civil rights movement in the 1960s, culminating with the Civil Rights Act. All right, so there's still that racism, and that racism has to do with the other. Those people are bad. Because they're dark skinned, that means they can hide at night. Therefore, we need a police force.
I think if society though gets more open and more inclusive, I feel like everything, we cycled through an era of civil rights, and now we're cycling back into this racist mode, and then there'll be a rejection to that, and we'll cycle back the other way, and it sort of gets, you can almost see the geometric, like a Fibonacci sequence, where it gets wider and wider and wider, you know.
It does. So in that regard, Martin Luther King was right when he says that the line or the motion of the universe is bending in the arc of justice. What he was actually getting at is that slowly the human race is waking up. We're coming out of living under fear. But it's going to take a while, and there's going to be lots and lots of cycles of it, mostly because those cycles are actually intentionally invented to make a profit or to make some sort of power. The people who are looking for power are able to manipulate it for a while, and then the people wake up a bit, and then they rock along and things get easy for them, and then the power want to come back in. They make everybody afraid again so that they can get back in power. That's the cycle between the Democrats and the Republicans, but it's also over a 50 or more year cycle. That there were race riots in the 1930s that people don't know about. And that culminated in when World War II happened, that they needed the blacks to be in the army. And so it was during the war that they decided that we can mix them, that we do not have to have the blacks in separate units. And boy, did that cause its own conflict.
Yeah.
That was where the Dixiecrats came from in 1948, was because the military had integrated. And then in the 60s, it was the integration of the schools with busing and all of that kind of stuff. So you can see, in fact, how deeply involved this territorial instinct between the whites and the blacks. And if the blacks have the same educational advantages that the whites have, they would be on par with them. And some people are okay with that, and others are not. Generally, it's the uneducated. This is why the power, let us say, behind DeVos, the Secretary of Education, they want the people of the United States to be poorly educated. They really do love the poorly educated. Why? Because the poorly educated are easier to manipulate. They live at more of a gut level, more of a emotional level, and they go along to get along. So they operate at a much more instinctual level. And so that fits quite in with the teaching of the Buddha, in the sense of that with knowledge, by being able to see things the way that they really are, we become disgusted with that system. And then we become disgusted with not the system itself, we become disgusted with the fact that I'm the one who's attaching to it. And so then with that disgust, rather than that, but we need first to see how disgusting this world is that we're clinging to, before we begin to see how disgusting it is that I'm doing the clinging. I was taught to cling. I went along to get along. But now that I can see things clearly, I don't have to attach to the world. I can become above the world. That Pali word is lokatara. and we translate it in English as supramundane. And that supramundane is, I'm above the world. I'm no longer attached to it.
Yeah.
This is Upadana, and this is Lokatara, or supramundane. I've let go of it. I'm no longer attached to the world. Because I think can see this.
It's interesting, too, that we were talking about being attached to our cell phones and technology, when I feel like, technology is, in a large part, enabling a lot of poor, uneducated people to become educated people. And you're seeing that happen in the United States right now.
Exactly, which means now the internet has to be flooded with false information.
Yeah.
It has to be absolutely flooded with false information. Otherwise, the people, if they got good information on the internet, they're going to wake up, and we don't want that.
Yeah. 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 There are a lot of people seeing the Dharma through the internet too, so.
Yes, there's going to be some waking up.
Yeah,
but
sure.
We cannot expect all of society to ever wake up.
Mm-hmm.
That those who wake up are always going to be in a small minority. There's only going to be a few Jedi Masters. There's only just a few Yodas. Most of them are gun-toting grandpas out on a hunting trip.
Well, I'm going to have to cut it short tonight, Dhammarato.
Me too. It's gotten kind of long. We've been at it an hour and a half, and I've really enjoyed this. So I'll leave you with the century of the self. Look at that thing that is so disgusting. Take a good close look at it, and then see the disgusting that you've grabbed it. Because when you finally let go, now you can see boundless joy to find at last that that thing is disgusting, and I'm no longer attached to it. I'm not clinging. It is not my prison anymore. And we have to do that over and over and over and over and over again. Sati.
The hard thing to accept is that it's easy. It's easy to let go.
Right. This time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
But then the question is, will I ever? The answer is, don't worry about it. Do it right now. The next time you catch yourself, let go then. Pretty soon you'll be able to see your approach, and then you'll say, wait a minute, I'm not even going to grab hold of that thing. All right, guys.
Great talk, Dhammarato.
This is great. We'll see you later.
Bye.